Hello and welcome to today's Students, Tomorrow's Talent, the live episode. We are so grateful that you're here with us on this show about work and learning after high school, brought to you by Lumina Foundation. I'm your host, Dakota Palicki, and it is such a pleasure to be with you today. We make podcasts and you put them out in the world, and people listen. You see the reports, you see the numbers, but it's a very different experience to have people here with you, either in the virtual or physical room. And I'm very appreciative for you spending some time of your day today to talk what I know is going to be a really great show. The thing is that chances are, if you're here and you're dedicating an hour to being with us today, and you're not my mother-in-law, who lovingly watches every single one of our episodes, chances are you work in the post-secondary education space. And if that's true, you have most likely been part of some effort, perhaps a scholarship committee or a legislative, working team. You've been part of some effort to try to reduce the barriers that people experience within our admission systems. In fact, some of you might be responsible for admission systems as enrollment management officers at an institutional state level. And I myself was in one of those roles. I was the director of college access for a large school district for a long time. And, I understand what that work can be like. You wake up every day and you're trying to solve problems for people. You're trying to make sure that people get in to the right system, that they have their credentials, that, the transcripts that we get from one place works for another. And most of your day can be problem solving and trying to make incremental progress towards making it a little bit easier for folks to get into our institutions of higher education. But occasionally, the conditions are right to really accelerate innovation in a space. The conditions can be set to say, we're going to reject old convention. We're going to no longer accept the excuse that, well, this is always the way we've done it. Let's just keep doing it. And instead, rally the right people, the right resources around this idea of what does it really look like to redesign this thing that we have? And that's exactly what we're talking about today. Today, we're going to be talking about the Great Admissions Redesign, a national effort that many, many states and institutions have been involved in to dramatically redesign admission systems in the places that they call home. Later in the show, we're going to hear from April Gromo from the California State University System, Stephen Gentile of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, and Dr. Jose Luis Cruz Rivera of Northern Arizona University, each of whom are going to tell us a bit about their specific work that they've done in their context to redesign admissions. But before we get to all that, I'm really excited to bring in my friend and colleague, Melanie Heath, Strategy Director from Lumina Foundation, to give us a bit of an overview of the Great Admissions redesign work. Melanie, thanks so much for joining me as a guest and as a co-host.
Yeah, I know. Have you ever had a co-host before, Dakota?
A couple of times here and there, but this might be our
Okay.
first live show co-host, and
Okay.
I'm very appreciative that you got the uniform right.
We are matching so well. It's
Yeah.
looking good.
Well
I
coordinated.
will try not to screw this up for any future co-hosts.
You're going to be wonderful already. Yeah. So,
Right.
it's funny. You and I were talking right before we got started, and I know we first met kind of when you were starting new at Lumina, and it was in the wings of a conference. And of course, we're swapping Lumina stories and things. And I just asked you, hey, what's on your mind? And you gave me at that time kind of a very high level idea of blueprint that now we know is the Great Admissions Redesign. Tell us about the idea behind it. Why did you get the Great Admissions Redesign even going?
Yeah, great question. When I first started at Lumina, it was a couple years ago, and if you'll remember, in 2023, we were just coming out of the pandemic, and a lot had changed in the admissions ecosystem. A lot of institutions went test optional. We saw declines in enrollments across both universities, community colleges, and others. And we also had the Supreme Court decision that banned the use of race-conscious admissions practices. And so all of these kind of conditions in the ether really threw the field into a tailspin. But more than that, I think we know, you mentioned how you worked in college access. We know that complexity in process harms access, right? If a process is mired in complexity, it takes a lot of time, it takes resources, it takes people to use social networks in order to navigate that system. I think what we're also finding now in this moment that we're in higher education, where there's just questioning of the value of higher ed and kind of this challenging narrative around it, is that complexity in process can also destroy trust. And I think if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, right? If the first touch point you have with the system is really complicated. It's covered in red tape. There's tons of bureaucracy. You have to pay for the privilege to be considered. All of these things. It means that the admissions process is acting as a gatekeeper instead of a gateway. So we really felt like all of those things came together, and there was this really unique opportunity for us to fundamentally just change the system, or ask states and systems for their best ideas on how to change the system, to redesign it, if you
Yeah.
will. um, so yeah, so we launched this big effort called the Great Admissions Redesign. We asked states and systems for their best ideas on how to fundamentally simplify the process. And we were really excited to award 7 grantees for that. And so we're kind of at the tail end of that process. It's been, each grant was about a year to 2 years. And so all of our grantees are kind of wrapping up, and we're really excited with what they've come up with.
Yeah, I know you got a pretty strong response.
We did.
I know you ended up having to select. That's always the hardest part.
Yes, the worst.
Yeah, right. You have all these great folks, great proposals coming in, and
Yeah.
regrettably, you only have a certain amount of dollars, so you
Yeah.
do have to pick. So, what was the response rate like? And can you tell us a little bit about those who've been
Yeah.
awarded?
Yeah. So we ended up awarding 7 grantees. But we got over 70 applications, and from over 30 states and territories across the country. And so we felt like we really hit on something. This felt really big and exciting. We ended up awarding these 7 grantees. So 3 implementation grants, which were larger grants for those who had piloted an effort and were ready to really take it to full scale. And then 4 smaller grants to those who wanted to embark on an envisioning process. And they really wanted to plan for an admissions redesign. And so our large scale grants went to the California University System, Illinois Board of Higher Education, and then Northern Arizona University. And then our planning grants went to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, Louisiana Board of Regents, the Kentucky Council for Post-Secondary Education, and the Washington Student Achievement Council.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a fantastic, response, and
Mhm.
obviously really eager to dig into some of these states. I know when I first saw the Great Emissions Redesign come out, I was really excited for it. Again, coming from this world and knowing, to your point about how complex these systems are, and especially if you're a first generation college goer, or perhaps you've been in college before and you had to stop out for some reason, all
Mhm.
these barriers all along the way can really dissuade you from going. And so I was a little surprised to see that there was a stronger emphasis on like states and state university systems and not necessarily institutional level giving. What was the kind of strategy behind that? That had to be an
Yeah.
intentional design choice.
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think what we've historically seen is that admissions is typically in the hands of the institution, not the state. What we're seeing right now, though, is more and more states and system offices are getting into the admissions game. There's a lot of reasons for this, right? Like is the enrollment cliff, and institutions and systems are having to think fundamentally differently about how they can kind of combine resources to make sure they're serving as a gateway instead of a gatekeeper.
Mm.
Um, but of the 70 applications we received for the Great Admissions Redesign, over 16 of them were from states and SHIO agencies. So that kind of reinforced this idea that states and state SHIO agencies and also systems are kind of in the admissions game in a way that they hadn't been before. And so we really wanted to kind of take some of that energy and catalyze it.
Yeah, well, and I have to imagine too, I mean, to your point about the important role that a lot of these states can play, it's difficult for an institution maybe
Mhm.
to make some changes when a state level data system's not quite functioning properly,
Right.
or I'm still running PeopleSoft beta from 1988,
Yes.
whatever it might be. So I have to imagine there was some, decision making too around how much scale that
Mhm.
you wanted to embrace
Yeah.
in hopes that you'd also get the scale kind of outcome. Is that part of the thinking?
I think that's right. And another thing, as someone who works in access, and I'm sure you relate to this too, is that systems and states can be agnostic in a way that individual institutions kind of can't be. As far as putting all of the opportunities in front of a student and then letting the student decide. And so the reason why we liked a lot of these projects is it kind of went that way, where students were really given the reins and allowed to make the decision for them. And so I think that kind of agnostic part is also a really important part of the access journey. And so we really appreciated these projects all had that kind of component.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and another strong theme of this work has been around innovation.
Mhm.
And sometimes I think we throw the word around a lot.
Yeah,
I know my,
fluency and
yeah,
yeah,
right. Like I know my skeptical brain can kick in and be like, well, what's it? Like, direct admissions, right? It's like,
yeah,
well, we've been doing direct admissions
yes.
forever. Is that really innovative? So I'm curious, as you've gone into some of this work and certainly as you've seen it kind of bear out, how did you think about innovation? And how do
Yeah.
you know, I guess, when you saw something as being innovative in the admissions space?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first it might be good to just kind of level set like what we
Sure.
mean when we talk about different admission types. And so direct admissions is you're right, it's been around 10 years, started in Idaho. And it's really just the general idea that a student would be proactively notified where they're eligible for and saved a seat at their receiving institution, and then the application process is dramatically simplified. There's a different type called guaranteed admissions, which is, I think we're most familiar with the Texas top 10% rule. So if you're in the top 10% of your graduating class, you're in at all of the Texas public institutions. Um, but I think what we're seeing is that, and this really speaks to it, we've done some research as part of the Great Admissions Redesign Project. And what we found is there are actually 6 discrete types of admissions redesigns. And so folks are really working hard to do what's possible within their own context. And Dakota, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned a really interesting definition of innovation. Would you mind sharing that again?
Yeah, it harkens back to an old episode we did on innovation in higher ed.
Yeah.
And we were talking, one of our guests was the president of Morgan State University, David
Mm.
Wilson.
Yeah.
And he was just reflecting. He said, I think if I remember the quote right, he said, he grew up in abject poverty in rural Alabama.
Mm.
And so he was reflecting on, for him, innovation started at a young age, making toys. And ever since then, he
Mm.
said, innovation to me is taking what you have and building what you need with what you have,
Yes.
essentially.
Building what
So
you need with what you have.
yeah, which has always been an interesting way to think about innovation from, how do I take what I have in my current state and move towards a future state
Yeah.
without having to have too much new, money or infrastructure invested into us,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Well, and you're a systems change guy, so
Yeah.
I don't want to preach to the choir here, but I have this kind of firm belief that innovation is kind of necessarily incremental, especially when you're working in policy spaces. I think that it's kind of you build on top of what's possible with what you have. And so I loved that definition of innovation. And I think what we're seeing in the admissions redesign space is that exactly people are doing what they can with what they have, and so when I think of things that are new and exciting in the admissions redesign space, I think about how um, folks are might not be able, because of the context within which they sit, to do the heaviest version of direct admissions. They can't quite remove the application, for instance, but they can do these iterations that are maybe lighter touches, but we're studying them to see if they're still just as meaningful as a heavier touch.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that we're seeing is not only are there kind of lighter touches, there's also people who are pushing the bounds of what direct admissions could be to include things like financial aid, as we're seeing in Washington State and with Tennessee. Um, Also, to include the movement of high school transcripts, which you spoke with at the beginning, where that's another barrier, and how can we solve for that? And so folks are really there's kind of the spectrum that we're seeing, and that's what feels new and exciting. In fact, I love this map, and it kind of takes my breath away a little bit, just because you'll see in orange the grantees for the Great Admissions Redesign. The rest in purple are states and systems who have some type of admissions redesign on the books. 24 states.
Wow.
Blows my mind.
Yeah.
Those in dark purple are those that have kind of quote unquote truer forms of direct admissions. And in light purple, the ones who are some other type of admissions redesign that you saw on the screen earlier. What this means in practice for students is that 2.4 million students, which is 63% of the 2026 high school graduating class, will have the opportunity to access college through a redesigned admissions process.
Wow.
Um, and so it's kind of it's mind-boggling to think about. And I think the other thing that we know about redesigned processes, back to the incremental piece, is that once kind of the data infrastructure and the communications channels are set, there's the opportunity to incrementally innovate on top of it. And so what I get most excited about this is seeing what's next. What are folks going to do next? And how are they going to continue to innovate and push the boundaries of what's possible as they simplify processes for students?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a massive swell of
Yeah.
work, and I completely agree that, systems in particular, right? They respond well to probes and pilots, and then you learn
Mhm.
about it, and you have to keep tweaking. So
Yeah.
it's certainly an iterative process. Folks, I just want to remind you to please submit your questions in our Q&A as we go through. Obviously, these there's going to be a lot of questions for you, I'm sure,
Yeah.
as well as our guests that we're about to bring in here. So don't hesitate to please drop in your questions that we'll get to later in the show. And also, these maps and obviously research for actions, wonderful typology.
Yes.
There's a
Thank you.
lot of wonderful resources here that we'll make sure gets in to the show notes once it's released as well. So
Thank you.
yeah, with this, I think it's probably a good time
Yeah.
to bring in some of our guests. Joining us now is Stephen Gentile, the Executive Director of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, Dr. Jose Luis Cruz Rivera, President of Northern Arizona University, and April Gromo, the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Strategic Enrollment at California State University System. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, of course. We're glad to have you. And obviously, we've been talking about all the wonderful work that's been happening under the Great Admissions Redesign. Dr. Cruz Rivera, I'd like to just begin with you and talk to us a little bit at the institutional level. Obviously, you had to work with a lot of partners, a lot of internal colleagues to really redesign some of the things that you're doing at Northern Arizona. Talk to us a little bit about what you ended up working on.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. And the work that we have been doing at Northern Arizona University speaks to what Melanie was just sharing around reducing complexity in processes and ensuring that we build a foundation upon which we can continuously innovate to make access and success more of a direct experience to our students and their families. About 4 years ago, the NAU community came together to establish a new vision statement. And the vision statement calls on the university to become a preeminent engine of opportunity, which speaks to the access side, driver of social impact, which speaks to our commitment to the community, and vehicle of economic mobility, which speaks to the quality of our degrees and how well we position our students for careers of consequence and lives of purpose. As part of that work, we really honed in on the redesigning of access structures and processes. And one of the first things we did was look at our price and positioning and establish a new promise for the people of Arizona, which is basically that if you come from a household with an income under $65,000 a year, you can come to NAU tuition free. We then realized that this was not enough because our admission standards themselves required 16 core courses in high school in a state that only requires 14 core courses for graduation. So there were 50,000 students throughout the state, 20% of our high schools that only had access to the 14 core courses required by the state. So we worked with the Board of Regents to ensure that we could change our policy so that our admissions to NAU could be easily framed and messaged as if you graduate from a high school in Arizona with a 2.5 GPA, which is now our assured admissions GPA, you're guaranteed admission to NAU. If you come from a household under 65K, it's tuition free. And if you are a member of any of the 22 federally recognized tribes in Arizona, you can also be at NAU tuition free. We quickly came to realize that that was not enough, that we needed to really work with what already existed in terms of our connections to community colleges. So we launched the Arizona Attainment Alliance with our community college districts in the state, and basically to ensure that we could create better pathways to NAU by leveraging our partner institutions partnership. And so from that emerged our latest innovation, if you will, which is universal admissions. And through that, NAU has gotten to the point where we send 0 letters of rejection out to our applicants. You're either admitted to NAU, given the eligibility criteria I mentioned earlier, or you're offered automatic admission to one of our community college partners with a guarantee that you will be able to transfer to NAU when you are ready. You won't have to apply again for a transfer. We will be with you from day one, ensuring that you can do so. And
Yeah.
I could talk all day about the great results, but I will say that we did all of this And we have record retention rates, record graduation rates. We were just designated Research One institution, designated a higher earnings institution, and have record philanthropic giving from our alumni and friends because they do believe that this is the way to go.
Yeah, it's such an excellent story, and one that's very clearly, again, hitting on the points around systems redesign and innovation. And I also really appreciate the point that you've made, which I know there are many institutions wrestling with, that when we address the affordability issue, perhaps by making it free to come, that doesn't necessarily result in the groundswell of enrollment, because then you hit the next barrier, you hit the next little barrier. So I so appreciate you took a holistic approach. And on this kind of promise that you've made to not send out rejection letters, which I think is incredibly powerful. I'm sure some of our folks who are listening in are curious about whether or not some of your community college partners were already open access, or did they also have to change some of their admissions work to better be able to integrate with what you all were doing at Northern Arizona?
Well, there was certainly a lot of work that we had to do together to get our admissions infrastructure aligned so that we could message back to our student applicants this promise of transfer to NAU by enrolling in one of our community college partners. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of data and technical infrastructure that we had to align. We had to align our messaging, how we communicate with students. And also, importantly, we have to align the way that we advise our students to make sure that this promise is real, that it's not just an option that we're giving them, but also a commitment that we are demonstrating by ensuring that as they're going through the community college coursework, that they are aligned and they are on pace to be able to transfer to NAU. So this is not a one-off. The Arizona Attainment Alliance, the Universal Admissions Program is just one of several initiatives that we have in place. We convene frequently to make sure that we're making progress, and it requires effort, but the rewards are certainly there. Just this year, 1,000 students raised their hand when given the opportunity to start at a community college and then transfer to NAU.
That's excellent work.
Incredible. And I'll just say, I've had the privilege of attending the Arizona Attainment Alliance retreat now twice. And it's the energy in the room is palpable. And working in a system that doesn't always happen with all the players. And I think what I've seen happen is sometimes you try to start an initiative and people engage, but they engage kind of arms crossed back, like, I don't know about this. But when I was in the room, I saw just leaning forward, intently excited, all of these people just authentically engaged. And just huge kudos to Northern Arizona University and especially President Jose Luis Cruz Rivera's leadership, I think has done a ton of that and kind of allowed that natural, authentic engagement to happen. So it's really exciting to watch.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, like those big systems, all those different partners can be hard to get on the same.
Skeptical.
Yeah, it can be skeptical. And, I can't think of a bigger system maybe than the California State University system. April, I'd love to bring you in at this point. I mean, we've been talking about fighting scale with scale, innovation, and large, complicated systems that have a lot of moving parts. I got to imagine you might have lost a lot of sleep over the past couple of years trying to find ways to redesign the admission system.
Most definitely.
Yeah, give us a sense of some of the work that you've undertaken.
Be happy to. So from the California State University perspective, we are the largest and most diverse university system in the nation. We serve a very economically diverse population, and we really consider ourselves to be the California's university. Our focus is on access and also providing students the ability to maintain or accelerate their social and economic mobility. So we really focused in a couple of areas. We were lucky to have a partner in our californiacolleges.edu system, and that system is now through the state's California Cradle to Career system. And yes, there's a lot of systems in California. The official college and career planning tool for 6th through 12th graders. And that tool has allowed us to accelerate some of the work that we're doing. But what it also does is it allows students to move their coursework from that system, California Colleges, into our Cal State Apply, our application system. So it greatly reduces that application barrier. And so we were able to leverage that tool and partner with them to start communicating to students about the opportunities for the CSU. And during our admissions redesign, which was not part of our original project, we did a pilot with the Riverside County Office of Education, which is over 100 high schools. We sent proactive direct admissions invites to over 17,000 students for fall 25. And we saw a huge uptick in our applications, the number of admissions, and then we're finalizing our enrollment numbers, of course. But the piece that was so illuminating was the number of students and their families that were so excited to know that a four-year university was an option for them. And they had students coming in changing their schedules so that they could be eligible for the CSU when they graduated. The other pieces that we were really excited about and part of our California Colleges.edu partnership is the ability to bring electronic transcript data over at the end of the school year. So that has helped us. We've piloted that with our teams the last couple of years, and it has actually helped us save students because we need a high school transcript to clear admissions. And so one of our schools, for example, was able to save about 67 students who didn't turn in their paper transcript, but we had that electronic transcript. Lastly, one of the other pieces that we're doing is for the students that aren't eligible for the CSU or maybe are starting at a community college, we have our Transfer Success Pathway program, which is our dual admissions program. And as long as students complete their coursework within 3 years and meet the terms, then they get guaranteed admission to the CSU campus that they have entered an agreement to. So we're really kind of trying a multi-prong approach to reach every student to let them know that the CSU is a viable and valuable option for them to get their four-year degree.
Yeah, it sounds like you're just busting one barrier after another, which is what this work is all about. And I know we have there's a lot of deep technical questions that I'm really eager to get to in a minute, because you've talked about a lot of these systems and a lot of things have to talk to one another, and that's some heavy work. As a reminder, if you're listening in, to please be sure to submit your own questions for our guest, for Melanie. Hopefully none for myself, but hey, I guess if you need one, let me know. But we'd love to get to your questions in about 15 minutes or so. Real quick, before we dive even a level deeper, I want to bring Stephen Gentile into the conversation from the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. Stephen, I know you weren't really part of the original kind of grantees of the Great Admissions Redesign, but that certainly hasn't stopped you in the state of Tennessee from taking some major steps in terms of reducing access barriers. Tell us recently about some of the things that you and your colleagues have been doing.
Yeah, Dakota, thank you, and Melanie as well. It's an honor to be here with all of you. We were approached about a year and a half ago by a colleague, former colleague, friend, and all-star researcher, Dr. Taylor Odell out of University of Wisconsin. And he had been researching direct admission in other states. And he said, I think Tennessee is primed to take this another level. We had not done direct admission here in Tennessee, but to Melanie's point earlier, I was taking lots of notes during her intro. Innovation is incremental, and what we're able to do now is built on decades of innovation beforehand. So we're now doing direct admission, sending out our first batch of letters in November, and it is a research study, randomized control trial with it. But we're going to add in for certain about a quarter, actually a half of all letters going out, a financial aid estimate to these letters. And how we're able to do that is we've long had, to that innovation incrementalism of the past, we've always gathered Tennessee Promise applications. Tennessee Promise in the state of Tennessee promises tuition-free education at our community colleges and technical colleges. And what we're adding this go around to that application is a request for their ACT information and GPA. And with that, we're able to tell students immediately whether they'll qualify for the merit-based scholarship, the HOPE scholarship, and other merit-based scholarships. We're also able to put into our letter like you will, if you go to these community colleges, get tuition-free education. So we're providing more financial aid information than they would have known beforehand. And that's a facet of information that's going to be really cool to track to see, are those students more likely to enroll at a university or a community college or a technical college? Right now, it is a trial period for about a year. We'll be testing it to see how it shifts enrollment. We were honestly hoping to get a few colleges to sign on and participate, maybe localize it in one part of the region in Tennessee, middle, west, east. But we actually got robust response when we started to approach institutions. All of our community colleges, all of our technical colleges will be participating. And we have 21 public and private universities also joining on. That's a total of 58 institutions will be participating in this process. And we did want this to be a carrot, not a stick. We don't want institutions participating if they don't want to participate. So to see that we have 58 joining on is pretty big. We also got support from the governor, Governor Bill Lee. The letter will be coming directly from him to all the families in Tennessee. We do have a control group, so there'll be about a quarter of the students will not receive anything. Another quarter will just receive a direct admission letter, and another cohort will receive admission and financial aid. And then with support, we'll also be providing to another cohort extensive advising as well. So there's a lot that we're chewing on with this study, but we look forward to seeing what happens.
Yeah, it's such a great example of some innovation. I just like to, stick with you for a minute there too, because I know anytime you do a randomized control trial like that, you're kind of put in this strange ethical spot. You're saying, hey, we know that these kinds of supports and interventions do make a difference, but we still need to have this control group to really, show the case. Can you talk about some of like the ethical debates that might have occurred in terms of whether or not you should proceed with using something like a randomized controlled trial or other experimental approaches?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we've always been hesitant to engage in RCT. So the randomized aspect of it is randomizing it to a high school. So high schools are going to be pre-selected. They already are into the different groups because we didn't want students within a high school to be getting a letter and others not because they were in different experimental groups in that end. So instead, it's going to be by high school across the state of Tennessee. When we launched this, we did hear from a couple of administrators their disappointment that they're not part of the experiment group, that they're in the control group. And our commitment to them is that next year, all high schools will be in the program, in the process. But it was, to your point, a concern. But I've got to balance that against that this does cost money to do. It takes time and resources. In Tennessee, we've had a lot of innovation over the years, and sometimes you can throw a lot of balls up in the air and continue doing them without actually knowing what's working, what's not working. So before we initiated this, we wanted to be sure that yes, research in other states showed the success of direct admission, but we want to make it so that it's true here in Tennessee before we commit to doing this long term.
And I think just to add to that, not to undersell this, this is the largest educational experiment ever. So it is 60,000 students are in this RCT. I don't know if you've heard of one that big, but that's the largest I've ever heard of. And so I think the gift that Tennessee is giving the rest of the country is telling us not just how effective is direct admissions on its own, how effective is it if you pair it with guaranteed state aid? And then how effective is that if you have an appointment with an advisor or if you have a text-based nudge? And so what we're going to learn from this will benefit the field immensely. And I do think it's pretty courageous to put a program out there and then be very honest on the other side about what works and what doesn't. So huge kudos to Tennessee for being willing to serve as kind of this testing ground for a lot of these exciting practices, and really, as we think about kind of the spectrum of admissions redesigns, really pushing that edge kind of as really, really far. And then sharing back with us, what they learned and what works and what doesn't, and how can we learn and grow and then further iterate to make a difference.
Yeah, and Stephen, I completely agree with your point. Sometimes we we do all these things, we pull all these levers, and then you see a bump in numbers, and you're like, well, which of these levers worked? And
Yeah.
it can be difficult when you're trying to tackle a systems redesign, trying to do multiple probes and multiple prongs to really see which one worked. April, I want to come back to you because I think you also brought up a really important part of this conversation, which is data and technology infrastructure. You are talking about, independent systems, technological systems talking to one another. You have all these kinds of different ways that people are sending in transcripts. You have to weigh the accessibility of certain technological systems as well as kind of update them to our modern expectations with technology, which seem to be changing by the day. So give us a hint of just an ounce, perhaps, because I'm sure you could talk for a long time about all the deep level of work you had to do on the technology and data infrastructure side to make the work you're doing in California work.
So we have been lucky that the California colleges system and the CSU have had a strong partnership for a long time. And so we already had built the integration between our two systems. What has really expanded the work and really focused it is two things. One is that, for example, Riverside County Office of Education was an early adopter of the California Colleges.edu college and career planning platform. And so that allowed us to work with them to do this direct admissions pilot and move people forward. The other piece that's really going to accelerate what we're doing in the state and allow us to expand direct admissions is that now within California Education Code, all schools that serve 9th through 12th grade students have to be on that California Colleges.edu system by 2026. And so we're really continuing to partner and ramp up. So the technology infrastructure was really laid prior to our great admissions redesign project. But through that emphasis and kind of our priorities and moving forward, we've been able to expand and really move much more quickly with our direct admissions program than we expected.
And if I can add, many states have a statewide college and career readiness platform. Texas, which is one of the winners of the Great Admissions Redesign, has My Texas Future. I know Florida has one. A lot of them have some way that students can kind of go through the college decision-making process. Right now, California is the only one that has the K-12 student record tied to that platform. And so what April and her team are doing is really harnessing that to make sure that high school credit and transcript can move seamlessly. It also really helps for advising purposes. If you're in 9th grade, you can see not only what courses you have to take to be eligible for high school graduation, but what courses you have yet to take to be eligible for the CSU. And so we've seen just an incredible opportunity there. And I think it again speaks to kind of, you can have the platform. If you tie in the K-12 student record, you can do more. If you can kind of build on top of it. So it was so exciting to see April and her team really move mountains with this. I mean, definition of an overachiever, where we're like, can you do this? And she's like, yes, actually, and we will do an entire pilot and all of the things on top of it.
It's really impressive. And in April, I'm sure, I mean, you also talked a little bit about some of the change that had to go on, and you have some pilots, you have some folks that are early adopters, but I also heard you say that, well, we are still the state. We can use our role, our position, our authority to say, you all need to be moving this direction too. Was it difficult to balance when to, go after an early adopter or be that supportive collaborative partner versus, hey, I'm the state and no matter what, you got to listen to me if I say, which I know is not anything you would ever say, I'm sure, but sometimes we reach for that authority, the authority stick really quickly.
Well, I am lucky enough to be, we are the California State University system, so we are not the state lawmaking entity. But with our cradle to career system, there has been a lot of support from the governor's office, from the executive director of what we call for short C2C. And so they were really able to get the education code changed to move this initiative forward. And so we, in some ways, are the beneficiary of those changes in state law to be able to integrate as we just talked about, that high school record into that college and career platform, and really be able to leverage that data into this next step to transition students more seamlessly from high school to the college environment.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, folks, we have one more question left, and then we want to get to yours. So if you haven't had a chance yet to stick your question into the QA, please do. We have a couple coming in, and we're eager to get to them. But before we open it up to all that who are listening, President Cruz Rivera, I want to kind of complete with you. We've talked about the tech side of things, the data management side of things. We've also, talked about some of the ethical standards, but you really pointed out very well how much collaboration it takes, going so far as to create the NAAA, right? 3 A's, N, I don't know, how you guys want to abbreviate it.
A plus plus.
A++. Oh, that's
Yes.
much easier. See, okay, thank you. I knew Melanie would have the co-hosting. There it is. So I'm just curious, you've had to really tend to cultivate relationships with these partners to have a lot of success in your work. You have the clear vision, you have all the hallmarks of really good change management. What was required though to invest in those relationships? As Melanie said, we know a lot of folks can come to the table, kind of arms folded. I'm here to listen, but not really participate. How did you help partners kind of get into this space where it's out of competition, it's about collaboration?
Well, we were very fortunate to be able to talk directly to our community college chancellors and presidents and just establish an ongoing conversation around what it is that we share in terms of our mission and our visions. And understanding that perhaps there's 90% of things in which we are sort of competitors in trying to advance our own missions. There's still 10% of things where if we work together, we can really elevate our individual and collective ability to serve the people of Arizona better. And so what we decided to do was bring together a coalition. So we don't have a formal system or the state guiding us. We basically said to all of the community college districts that have their own boards, as we have our own board of regents shared with University of Arizona and Arizona State University, let's come together as individual institutions. Let's spend a year. Let's talk about what it is that we could do together to really enhance access and attainment in Arizona. And at the end of that year, we can decide whether or not we want to continue as an alliance or we want to continue doing some specific work. Not everybody has to do all of the projects at the same time. We can phase the work in to make sure that we are not imposing new work on institutions, but rather we're complementing and accelerating the work they already wanted to do or are doing. And at the end of that 1 year, of conversation and convenings, we had identified a handful of things, including universal admissions, which I mentioned earlier. We have identified also, for example, milestone credentials. We're looking at ways of leveraging the trust that we have built already and the technological infrastructure to really enhance reverse transfer work. We're looking at getting into our high schools for dual enrollment. And at the end of that year, we had all of these ideas, and we said, okay, let's choose how we're going to do this in terms of phases and cohorts. And we've been doing the work ever since. We've been meeting regularly. We have convenings or retreats twice a year. And I must say that it's really interesting to see how the power of the coalition of the willing has made things so successful for us. I came to NAU from the City University of New York before I was at the Cal State University system. And there you would think that because you have this authority, as you were mentioning earlier, Dakota, that you can drive things at a certain pace. What I found is here, even though we all have different constituencies, stakeholders, and boards, we have been able to innovate and advance our missions at a quite rapid pace.
Yeah, it's such an excellent point. I mean, again, I spend a lot of my time in the systems change world, and you talk about creating the conditions for people to come together and collaborate in a non-competitive way. But I think the other secret sauce that you've hit on here is the sense of time. There are so many times where we get invited to some kind of collaborative conversation, and there's no end date to it. It's like, this is your new job, welcome. And you're like, why do I even want to be at this table? And instead you're saying, hey, we're going to spend a year doing this, and then we're going to, prioritize after that year and continue to meet. So definitely kudos to you and the team. I think we're at a good time to turn to some of our audience questions.
Yeah.
And so our guests are still available as we start to take them. We do have one coming in from Andrew Schwartzberg. Andrew asks, for the states shown on the redesign map, and maybe we can pull that back up here. Is the redesign only for state-run schools, or are private institutions in those states also impacted by the work?
That is such a great question. And the very unfair answer is it depends.
Sure.
So in Minnesota, for example, their direct admissions program includes a lot of private institutions. In North Carolina, their direct admissions program is actually run by their Independent Colleges and Universities Association. And so they facilitate direct admissions. And I wonder if I can throw this over to Stephen too, because I know in Tennessee, they have included several private institutions within their direct admissions pilot. So Stephen, I'm curious if you have any thoughts about what that's been like to work with the private institutions in Tennessee on this.
Yeah, we see in Tennessee, our private institutions are very much a part of our enterprise, and we can't do what we need to do in Tennessee without them. So we were very intentional on engaging with an organization, TACUA, which is the Association for Independent Colleges and Universities in Tennessee, and working through them to connect with our institution presidents for all their member private institutions. And honestly, they responded very quickly and are engaged. I want to give a special shout out to Brett Gibson, our Chief Access and Outreach Officer. He worked diligently on sitting down with presidents from all institutions and then with the directors of admission at the private and public institutions, just walking them through what this is, what this isn't. And from there, we got a lot of support from the private institutions as well.
It's excellent. We have another question coming in too, and it actually goes back to where you started this, Melanie. There is a lot of folks who are, questioning the value of, college and a higher education or a post-secondary credential.
Yeah.
And we know that today's students are different from the students that most of our systems are redesigned. So, one of our listeners is asking, what are some of the early results in terms of the kinds of messages that seem to really work with today's students, convincing them that it's really worth it to go to college in the first place? Have you seen anything? All of these systems end up communicating to a student or to a family. Have you seen anything across the cohort about messaging that seems to work really well?
I love that question. That's such a great question. I think what we know about direct admissions is that it works best for students who are kind of on the go or no-go bubble. So if you think about it, if you're a student who identifies as a college-going student and you get a letter that says, congratulations, you're in at 8 institutions, you're already going. It's not really changing your college behavior or your college enrollment behavior. But if you're a student who kind of isn't sure, who says maybe I would be a first generation student, I don't know if college is for me, I don't know if I'm quote unquote worthy, we make students jump through all of these hoops. And so I think the message is very different, where if it says, hey, actually, you're in at 8 institutions. In fact, you're not only in, they're saving a seat for you. You belong here. I think that has a lot of ties to literature around belonging on campus and supporting students as they see themselves as college, quote unquote, material. I also think we've talked a little bit about today's students. And what we know is that a lot of students of today are not necessarily coming right out of high school. And a lot of the programs we've talked about are kind of for those more traditional age students. So what I'm hoping we'll see as we broaden the spectrum of what direct admissions could be is looking at ways to directly admit students who are in the work, or potential students who are in the workforce, finding them in different places and really supporting adults in enrolling in that way. And so as I've been talking about admissions redesign stuff, I think that could be kind of the next frontier of where we go with this, is finding adult learners in our communities and supporting them by directly admitting them, even outside of the high school. So yeah, kind of, I think a couple things to consider there.
Yeah, absolutely. And President Cruz Rivera, I know, you've mentioned something incredibly powerful, which is that, no student gets a rejection letter anymore.
Mm.
And that's a powerful psychological message. But I have to imagine too that your team probably put a fair amount of effort into figuring out what the new communication sounds like. Tell us a little bit about some of the language that you might have wrestled with, how to get that messaging right.
That's a great question, and it is something that we're still to this day working on. But basically, the thrust of the discussion is how do you ensure that the student knows that they are capable of not only aspiring to come to NAU in this case, but being successful. And so the letter has to be one where either you are admitted directly to NAU, or the message is one where you are saying that we love for you to be a lumberjack. We know that you can be a lumberjack, and we are admitting you to the class of 2030, let's say, right? And here's a pathway, automatic and guaranteed pathway for you to do that. So we have been running a lot of different messaging tests, and have found that the more that you can convey the institutional confidence in that particular student being able to succeed in what their goal is, the more likely it is that those students will accept the invitation to start at a community college and then transfer to NAU.
Yeah, and I think there's also a lesson to learn from that for open access institutions. This is work way back in my Chicago days where some of our open access institutions wouldn't send out an acceptance or rejection letter. It was just, well, you fill out this enrollment form and congratulations. And meanwhile, they're surrounded by friends and family who are pinning up acceptance letters on their school bulletin board. And so it's, well, what would it cost you to say, hey, you've been accepted? And yeah, we're open access, but you've still been accepted. You can come here. So I think that kind of communication piece is so critical.
I also think there's something about you as an institution know you're open access. That doesn't mean those in your community do. And I think that there is something about advertising that, but also celebrating it, that can make a big difference and support students in understanding, like, I can get in to this open access institution. I remember a story I think I shared on the first podcast we did together was I was working at a college application week event, and I was supporting a student filling out an application, and he said, "Oh, I really wish I could go to this school, but I just don't think I can get in." And he didn't know it was an open access institution where all you needed was a high school diploma. And so that has stuck with me in kind of just the, I don't know, information asymmetry that's out there, where those of us in higher ed kind of know all of these things, but students and families in their communities, it's hard to sort through.
Yeah.
And so whatever we can do to clarify that, I think makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we have a couple more minutes left for audience questions. There's a couple here that I think we can, first I'll say, someone is asking, hey, is there more information about the system redesign plans, projects associated with these 7 states? There an eagerness to dig in more. I'll just answer that quickly. I know that there's already a lot of great information out there on our website.
Yes.
There's more reports and things coming. You can, of course, like and subscribe to our podcast where we're going to share this recording and have a bunch of show notes as well. So be sure to subscribe to make sure you don't miss when this show gets re-released as a recording. But I would just say continue to watch Lumina's website for more information. But we had another question that came in, just wondering about, hey, are there bold innovations that you would like to try, that we'd like to see happen, that we just haven't been possible yet, that hasn't really made it?
Ooh. So what I mentioned earlier about solving for adult learners with direct admissions, I would love to see a state or system or even group of institutions try something really exciting about that. I would love to see more projects that tackle financial aid, particularly state financial aid, and guaranteeing that up front for students. I think that could be really, really incredible because we do know affordability is a huge, huge barrier. And if we could tell students, hey, you're in at these institutions and you have this many dollars, or best case, it's paid for, I think that's also something really exciting to share. Another thing is, and we've actually had some of our grantees have tried to tackle this too, is we have so many students taking dual enrollment courses now. 1 in 5 community college students are current high school students
Right.
taking dual enrollment courses. And we have a ton of CTE courses that are credit bearing in our high school environments. And so how do we pair all of this together? And I think, how can we make this a really seamless blend from secondary to post-secondary? One way I've heard it described is like, we want the transition from high school to college to feel as streamlined and straightforward and as expected as going from middle school to high school. There's some paperwork involved, there's some of that, but guess what? You're going.
Yeah.
Another way to think of it is changing the process from an opt-in process to an opt-out process. So the expectation is that you go. And I do think that there is something in today's world. We know that earning some type of credential after high school is necessary, not just for economic stability, but for economic prosperity. And so how can we support more folks and students on that pathway? And so I think thinking of it holistically and thinking about how students move from one to another is what gets me really excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I know there's a lot of eagerness to learn from the current grantees that are still doing some work. You know, there's planning grants, there's been implementation grants. So I know there's going to be a lot shared out. Obviously, excited to see the results. And we've had some comments and some questions around whether or not some of the experience in Tennessee or Arizona and California, some of those results are going to be shared publicly. And I think the answer is yes in some place. You know,
Yes.
at some point in time, when
Absolutely. I
it's
mean,
going.
well, as we know in higher ed, these things take time.
These things take time.
So
Yes.
I do think we're kind of looking at like spring, summer 2027 when we'll get some initial results from the giant experiment in Tennessee. But we will, you know, with Stephen's blessing, we will share those very loudly, just because I do think it's so important for the field to understand what works and for who.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, as we're winding down, you know, curious if you know, I think there's kind of two questions. You know, we hear about these great things that people are doing around different states, and I think there's a lot of people listening that are probably eager to figure out, like, well, how do I start?
Yeah.
You know, maybe I don't have a grant, you know, maybe I don't have, you know, some of the extra resources and support, but you know, certainly we have all these things we can learn from. Where should I start? What's your advice to folks?
Yeah. Not to toot our own horn, but we do have a ton of resources on our website that are learnings from this first iteration of the Great Admissions Redesign. So we have a lessons learned report about what are the contextual factors to consider before embarking on a redesigned admissions process. We have the research that was done by Research for Action around the typology we talked about. And what are the pieces within the typology. And we have just a lot of case studies and other things about data systems and all the kind of enabling conditions for something like this to happen. So I would say kind of start there. Reach out to me. I would love to talk to you. I think there's a lot of connections to be made, and also reach out to your neighboring states and systems. There are a lot of folks doing really, really excellent work in this. And it's a little bit siloed right now, I think, just because every state or system has their own unique context and problem they're trying to solve for. And so, but that doesn't mean we can't learn from each other. And so that would be a recommendation too, is see what's out there, talk to folks, better understand what's possible within your context. And then I would also say just start somewhere.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about, I feel like I've done this like stacking motion a lot.
Sure.
Just like the ways that you can build a foundation and then iterate upon it. And so I do think just working on a foundation of some kind, and then knowing there's kind of endless possibilities on top of that. And so don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I love the saying better is better.
Mm.
And I think that that's something that has stuck with me through a lot of this, is like, we'll build something and then always working to make it better.
Yeah, I like a lot of what you're saying. Again, this kind of innovation, this kind of change is incremental.
Mhm.
Go and take a look at, what other states are doing. Go look at the resources that we have out there and ask the question of, where is the energy going?
Yes.
Who could I come around that wants to share in this, and which of this could we try out, and let's try and document and learn and share and elevate. And, that's how you wake up every morning and try to improve the system. The other thing I like that you said is, I'm pretty sure I just heard you say the first round of the Great Emissions Redesign, which
Yes.
seems like then there's a second round. Is that true? Is there going to be a second round of this? Oh, cool.
Yes. So excited to share that on September 30th, we are launching the application for the next round of the Great Emissions Redesign funding.
Amazing.
And so we're putting about, I think, $3.3 million toward this. And we're really excited for states and systems and groups of at least 3 institutions to apply. And we are wanting to support all projects along the admissions redesign spectrum. So we had talked about how those are doing, quote unquote, lighter versions of direct admissions or something like that, and then really pushing the boundaries of what a simplified admissions process could be. And so we're really excited about that. I think the other thing that I referenced a little earlier is a lot of this work can feel kind of lonely. I've worked in a system office and state office, and you're pretty removed from the student experience, and you're working and grinding and trying to remove these barriers, and like, you don't always see the payoff in the students' faces at the end of the day. And so one thing that we're building intentionally into this next round is a proper network. So we want grantees and others to come participate, learn from each other, share. There'll be kind of peer-to-peer mentoring opportunities, convening opportunities. But I think to kind of let folks know that, like, you're not alone. This is actually something that is happening across the nation. Like we said, 24 states are kind of working on some type of this. And we feel like there's so much, to learn from each other. And so really excited about that. But yes, if on our website, you'll be able to find a link to register to the September 30th webinar, which is where it will be, we'll go through the application, and then there'll be a live Q&A where you can ask questions about eligibility or questions about that. And yeah, we're just really excited about what's going to happen next in this national movement of admissions redesign.
Yeah, congratulations. Well, folks, make sure you mark your calendars for September 30th. I know I'll be there, and looking forward to learning more.
And your mother-in-law, hopefully.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if she does the webinars. Maybe she might stick to just podcasts, but who knows? She's a busy lady.
So supportive.
Yeah, it's very much so. Well, Melanie, thanks for coming in, for co-hosting, and for being here. And thanks to all of our guests, April Gromo, Stephen Gentile, excuse me, and to Dr. Jose Luis Cruz Rivera. So grateful to all of you. And thank you all for joining us today, for taking a little bit of your time to join this live episode of Today's Students, Tomorrow's Talent. Our show is produced by Mike Jensen, Tracy Chen, Melanie Heath, and me, Dakota Policki, with support from Amy Bartner, Matthew Jenkins, and Mandy Facer. Deborah Humphreys and Kevin Corcoran provide leadership for Illumina's strategic engagement efforts. And like we said before, I'm really hoping you go out, like, subscribe, connect with our show wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple, we're on our website. We keep mentioning Lumina's website, might as well go there too. So like and subscribe wherever you get your shows. And as always, if you have an idea for a show or for a guest that you want us to cover, drop us a line at luminafoundation.org. Thanks again for being with us. We'll see you next time.